Hey Optimancers, Chris here. About a month ago, the new sourcebook was released for Dungeons & Dragons called Mythic Odyssey of Theros. And this sourcebook presents a new campaign setting that is from Magic the Gathering, but this campaign setting really is inspired by ancient Greece. So we see Greek myths and plays off of Greek myths. Another thing we see in this sourcebook, we see a couple new races and we see a couple new subclasses. Today I want to talk about the two new subclasses in Mythic Odyssey of Theros. Let's go through the abilities they get, and we're going to kind of analyze them, and I'll tell you my overall impressions of each of these subclasses. There's been quite a bit of discussion online about both these subclasses, but I'm going to give you my personal take on each one, and I don't necessarily agree with some of the things I've heard online. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my Patreon. There is a link in the video description for my Patreon page, and my patrons get early access to ad-free versions of these videos. In addition, higher level tiers get access to private chats, influencing me on what kind of videos I'm going to be making, as well as joining me for a one-shot once a month of D&D that I run. And I want to mention a few of my Archmage subscribers today and thank them so much for their support. Dash Panther, Yunru, TUM, Michael Troy, Christian Wyndham, Awesome Face, Leighton Hagland, and Joseph Robideau. Thank you so much for your support. And let's get started talking about the new subclasses in Mythic Odyssey of Theros. The first subclass I'm going to talk about is the new Bard subclass, the College of Eloquence. This one has been received reasonably positively by the community that I've seen. And it is, I think, the most powerful Bard subclass up to now. This is one of those cases where we talk about power creep, where as more source books get released, eventually something they release will be the most powerful version of that thing. And what it does is, as time goes on, PCs become more and more powerful as they get access to better and better spells, better and better subclasses, and better races. College of Eloquence is definitely one of those cases. The Bard is already a pretty solid class, so when you add stuff onto it, it's very good. And the Bard subclasses I consider to be fairly well balanced against each other. Valor, Lore, Glamour, Whispers, I think are all solid subclasses. I think the Whispers is the weakest of those, but I think all of them are reasonably solid. But College of Eloquence is better than all four of those. And let's go through the abilities and I'll explain why. The very first thing they get at third level, they get two abilities. The first is Silver Tongue. This is just an always-on ability, and basically it's going to make it so that you never fail another persuasion check or deception check in the game again at level 3. So we're taking two skills, persuasion and deception. These are skills that bards are often going to have proficiency in already, if not expertise, based on their primary ability score. So even at level 3, we're probably looking at a +5 bonus on each of these skills. And every time you make a check, every time you roll the d20 to make either of these checks, any roll under a 10 is treated as a 10. So this means that you cannot do worse than a 15 likely at level 3. That is going to go up. You could be easily looking at, by level 5, having a minimum of 20 in either of these. So, like I said, just even with incredibly difficult DCs, automatic successes on all your persuasion and deception checks right at level 3. Rogues get a similar ability, but they don't get it till level 11. So getting this at level 3 is very early for this kind of ability. Yet, believe it or not, that's not their best third level ability. The other ability they get at third level is Unsettling Words, and this is probably the best ability they get. Certainly as far as bards go, I think it's the best ability out there. So what this does is it allows you to use your bonus action to provide a penalty to a creature's saving throw. And this saving throw doesn't have to occur on your turn. It can occur any time after you use this ability. It's just the next saving throw that creature makes. You spend one inspiration die, and then that inspiration die will be rolled as a penalty on that creature's next saving throw. Of course, the obvious thing here is that you're going to use this as a bonus action, and then you're going to cast a spell, and that spell is probably going to provide a saving throw. If you are a bard, that's going to be a lot of the time, because a lot of your best spells are providing saving throws, and a lot of those spells are even single target spells. So you have a spell like Dissonant Whispers, or Suggestion, or Tasha's Hideous Laughter. You can use your bonus action to give them this penalty and then cast the spell, and then they're very unlikely to make their saving throw. Technically speaking, because this is a penalty, that's a die roll, it's not disadvantaged, so if you were to, say, multiclass sorcerer, you could also combine this with something like empower spells if you really want to make sure your spells hit. I don't think that's worth it. I think you're better off going straight bard and getting the higher level spells. With this, it is going to be scaling as well. So your bardic inspiration die is going to increase from a d6 to a d8 to a d10 and eventually to a d12. And that die is what the penalty is. So the penalty is going to get worse and worse as you go up in levels, despite the fact also your DC is going up and up as you go up in levels. So you have the penalty increasing on one side, the difficulty of the check in the first place increasing on the other side, and you're just going to have it where creatures can be almost guaranteed to fail when you use unsettling words on them. There's another advantage to unsettling words over something like empower spells, and that is that it doesn't need to be attached to a single spell casting. So if you do empower spells, and let's say you do something like a hold monster, then that creature would have disadvantage on its initial saving throw. But when it makes a saving throw the following turn, then it doesn't have disadvantage anymore. With unsettling words, as long as you have more bardic inspiration dice, you can keep applying it even on the same effect. So if you did a hold monster on a single big tough enemy, and then you use unsettling words to make sure it fails its save, then on the following turn, you could use your bonus action again to throw another unsettling words. So it would have a disadvantage on its next save, even though you didn't cast that spell that round. So that is something unique as well. Normally, penalties are only on an initial saving throw or a single saving throw, but with unsettling words, you don't have that restriction. As a third level feature, this is really good. Now, it's using up your bardic inspiration dice, but I think it's well worth it for you to be spending your bardic inspiration dice on this rather than providing it out as regular inspiration. But that's going to change because your inspiration is going to get better and better. And at 6th level, we're going to see that with unfailing inspiration. This is a really nice boost to inspiration in general. And what this does is whenever a creature has bardic inspiration from you, and they spend it to make an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, and the roll fails, they don't lose the bardic inspiration die. So this means that any time your bardic inspiration doesn't work, it's basically free because they still have bardic inspiration they can use for some other check. So even if you fail 2 checks in a row using inspiration, you would still have that inspiration die. You're going to be able to keep using it until you succeed. This is a really nice boost to inspiration. And then it's going to make your inspiration go further as well, which of course, considering how good our 3rd level ability is, we want, because we're going to want to not spend too much inspiration on the rest of the party when we have such a powerful effect affecting our spells. This does draw from the same resource though. Now you're going to get it back at every short rest by 6th level, but it is going to run out reasonably quickly, even if we're boosting our charisma. But again, we're not getting one ability at level 6, we're getting 2 abilities at level 6. So we are also going to get universal speech, a really useful ability. You spend an action and 1 or more creatures up to your charisma modifier can understand you regardless of the language you speak. So if we combine this with a comprehend languages, which we can do as a ritual, then we are talking about the tongue spell, which is a 3rd level spell. We're getting this for free as a 6th level ability. In addition, this is a 1-hour duration. That's a very nice duration. There is no concentration, and the only limit is you can do it once per long rest, but you can also expend a spell slot to use it again. So we could expend a 1st level spell slot to get this, what is essentially copying a 3rd level spell, again if we need it. So admittedly, purely utility, but a useful utility ability that the Eloquence Bard gets on top of already a good inspiration boost at this level. Then at 14th level, we get the final ability for the Eloquence Bard, and what it does is it's called Infectious Inspiration. And whenever a creature that you've given Bardic Inspiration to uses its dice on an ability check, attack roll, or saving throw, that's, of course, all they can spend it on anyway, and the roll succeeds, you can then use your reaction to give that inspiration to a different creature. And that doesn't use any of your Bardic Inspiration uses. So what this means is that we're going to be able to potentially give out inspiration more than once around. In addition, what it means is we're going to be spreading our inspiration even further. Now, this is limited to the number of uses equal to your charisma, just like your inspiration, but this only comes back every long rest. But now what it happens is when somebody uses inspiration, if they fail, they don't lose it. And if they succeed, you can give it to somebody else. So whether they fail or whether they succeed, there's going to be a benefit from you having provided this as an Eloquence Bard. That's a pretty big boost to inspiration. But once again, we're feeling that stretch from using our inspiration to penalize enemy saving throws or using our inspiration for our party, especially when that's getting better and better. But what I could definitely see is, let's say you have a 20 charisma. So you're going to use 4 of your inspirations on targeting enemy saving throws. And you're going to use 1 inspiration on a party member. That party member uses that inspiration. If they fail, they keep it. And if they succeed, then we just jump it on to the next party member. And so on and so forth. So we can have that inspiration going and going and going from a single use of our inspiration pool, giving us lots left to target enemies and lower their saving throws. That's really good because inspiration is a good ability already. And for a bard where so many of their spells rely on saving throws, having that ability to over and over again penalize enemy saving throws for that penalty to get bigger and bigger, and it only uses a bonus action, is really very, very good. And I think that ability alone is the one that kind of jumps this bard into first place as far as Bard subclasses go. Now, I don't think this Bard subclass is miles above the other Bard subclasses. I think still the other Bard subclasses are solid, but I do think this is the best of all the Bard subclasses so far. So that brings us to the next subclass I want to talk about, and that is the Oath of Glory Paladin. So we have quite a few subclasses for Paladin already. There's 3 in the Player's Handbook, 2 more in Xanathar's, there's 1 in Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and now we have 1 more. So we have a whole bunch of Paladin subclasses out there, and overall I think they're mostly reasonably good. I think there is definitely some that are better than others, and I think that there are some that are good for certain kinds of campaigns, not for other kinds of campaigns. And now we're bringing on yet another subclass of Paladin. And the consensus I've seen looking online is pretty bad. People do not like this subclass. People who say it's the worst Paladin oath now. People who think it's so bad, it's just creating a subclass that no one will play. That doesn't have a single feature why people would want to play it. That the Oath of Glory is not glorious at all. They think it's been royally screwed up. People are seriously disappointed. They wonder how it was even published. And the only thing good about it is apparently some people even canceled their Amazon orders for Odyssey of Theros because they did not want this book with the Oath of Glory as it's written. So these are some really, really negative thoughts about this subclass. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think this Paladin subclass is decent. I certainly don't think it's the strongest Paladin subclass, but I do not think it is the weakest Paladin subclass either. And I think it's very playable. The first thing we need to remember is the base Paladin class is pretty good. We're getting big boost to saving throws. We're getting big boost to offense. We're getting spell casting. We're getting fighting styles. We're getting a very powerful cure ability. And so Paladins are very good before we look at the subclass. So when we look at the subclasses, just remember everything about this is going on to the Paladin. But in addition, what we really need to do is we need to remember that these abilities combine with what a Paladin can already do. How well do they synergize with those abilities? And this is where I think people are missing a bit with the Oath of Glory. I think the Oath of Glory has abilities that work well with what a Paladin already does. First, let's look over the tenets. So the tenets are action over words, strive to be known by glorious deeds, not words. Challenges are but tests, face hardships with courage and encourage your allies to face them with you. Hone the body, Like raw stone, your body must be worked so its potential can be realized. And discipline in the soul, you must marshal the discipline to overcome failings within yourself and threaten to dim the glory of you and your friends. So these are the easiest tenets in the world to do. Every paladin I've ever played already follows these tenets. They're super easy. So let's look at the spells they get, because all oaths get their own set of spells. So at 3rd level, we're getting Guiding Bolt and Heroism. The first thing I'll mention is Guiding Bolt is a decent spell for 1st level, decent ranged blast. And remember, we're playing a paladin. What are paladins weak at? Well, they're weak at ranged attacks. They tend to be strength-based. It means they're probably not going to be very good using a bow or a crossbow, so they end up throwing javelins. Of course, we have issues with drawing javelins once we get extra attack, because we only have one interact with an object. It means potentially dropping weapons on the ground so that you can draw those javelins. They don't do a heck of a lot of damage, and they don't have a great range. So Guiding Bolt gives us a spell we can cast that does have a great range, does good damage for the level, and has a rider on it that the next attack against that creature has advantage. That's a nice boost for a paladin specifically, because a paladin just doesn't have ranged spells on the paladin spell list, so this gives them a ranged attack they can do that is reasonably effective. I think that's quite good. And then we have Heroism. Now, Heroism eventually isn't going to be all that great for a paladin, because they're going to get immunity to fear anyways. But at 3rd level, I think getting immunity to frightened and getting temporary hit points that recover every turn is good for a melee combatant, because the melee combatants are more likely to face creatures with fear effects. We have frightening auras and such like that. They're always going to be within those auras, so they're going to be making checks. Now, a paladin's already proficient in wisdom saving throws, but their wisdom scores tend not to be that high, so they have not a great chance usually to make those saves. Having that immunity is useful at these low levels. And getting your ability modifier in temporary hit points each turn, as a frontliner, you are probably taking consistent damage. That means you're going to get more use out of Heroism. The issue here, of course, is concentration. If you're taking that damage over and over, it's going to be hard to concentrate on Heroism. So I think this isn't a terrible spell for a paladin to have, but I do think we need to remember that that concentration is going to be difficult to hold if we expect those temporary hit points to be constantly lost. And if we don't, then Heroism isn't that great a spell. So Guiding Bolt, I think, is really the star of our 1st level. At 5th level, we get Enhanceability and Magic Weapon. Now, Enhanceability is a useful utility spell. This is not something that you will normally be casting in combat unless you're working off something like a grapple build or something like that, where you're going to be making ability checks in combat. But Enhanceability is definitely a useful utility spell, because you can cast it on the ability score that you need the advantage on before you need it. And I find Enhanceability comes up over and over in campaigns, so having access to that yourself is something that you're probably just going to keep in your pocket. And when you need it, it's there. And that's largely the case with Magic Weapon as well. Magic Weapon, of course, is something you will be using in combat, but it is not something I'd be concentrating on all the time. +1 to hit and +1 damage is not that great for a 2nd level spell and concentration. But when we fight a creature that has immunity or resistance to non-magical attacks with those weapons, then Magic Weapon becomes essential to a paladin, and then Magic Weapon becomes a fantastic addition to the spell list. So again, something to keep in your pocket, but when you need it, you really need it. So Magic Weapon, I still think, is a good thing for a paladin to have. Won't be using it all the time, and that's the same thing with Enhanceability. At 9th level, I think the paladins get a great spell, and that's Haste. Haste is definitely a spell I would love to have with a paladin, because paladins often hit very, very hard, but they don't necessarily get as many attacks as some other kinds of builds like fighters or monks, but Haste is going to give you 1 additional attack every round. In addition, we're increasing our armor class by 2. That's a significant bonus. That's like having Shield of Faith up. Advantage on dexterity saving throws. This is a saving throw that comes up reasonably often. And the speed is doubled. And with the Oath of Glory Paladin, this is especially good, and we'll get into that. So Haste is definitely something I would be casting with my Oath of Glory Paladin. As we get into the super higher levels, the spells here I don't think fit quite as nicely. Freedom of movement is one that I would definitely want to have. Again, it's one of those ones you want to just kind of keep in your pocket, and when you need it, you really need it. But Compulsion, Commune, Flame Strike, I probably wouldn't be using those very much. But at the levels that we are likely to actually be playing, and remember, a lot of campaigns are done by 13th level. So in the levels that we are actually playing, I think that the Oath of Glory Paladin spell list is decent. I'm not convinced it's the best spell list for any oath. Conquest, for example, has a really nice spell list. Vengeance has a good spell list. The spell list here, I think, is solid, just not amazing, but I do think it works well with being a paladin. Now at 3rd level, we're going to get 2 different uses for our channel divinity, Peerless Athlete and Inspiring Smite. Now Peerless Athlete, what it's going to do is you're going to use your bonus action. Now remember, with a paladin, we're not necessarily using our bonus action every round, so that's not a big deal. But you're going to use your bonus action and your channel divinity, and for the next 10 minutes, which is a good duration, you can have advantage on all your strength athletics checks and your dexterity acrobatics checks. You can also carry, push, drag, and lift twice as much weight as normal. And the distance of your long and high jumps increases by 10 feet. This extra distance counts as movement as normal. So a lot of people don't like this ability. I think it's pretty good. First off, bonus action, not a problem. 10-minute duration means it's probably going to last for multiple combats. We're going to get advantage on 2 different ability checks. Certainly if you're ever in a situation where you're in danger of being grappled or anything like that, these are the 2 ability checks that allow you to prevent that. If you want to initiate a grapple, athletics is the ability check for that, so you would certainly be better at grappling. But often there's athletics or acrobatics checks just as part of movement. It is not uncommon. If you're jumping from a high distance or something like that, the DM might ask for an athletics or acrobatics check to keep your feet. A DM might require these kinds of checks, and getting advantage on them in combat, I think, is moderately useful. The increase to carry weight, this is utility only. I don't see this coming up in combat much at all, but potentially if we are talking about using grapple and then drag, then if we're doing a creature that's very large and very heavy, I could see it being useful there, but for the most part, I don't see that coming up in combat. The one I definitely see coming up in combat is the jumping. I think the jumping one is something that would be fantastically useful for tactics in combat. So with a long jump, if you have a 10-foot movement before you make that long jump, you can jump up to your strength in feet. So if you have, say, a 16 strength, you can jump 16 feet. So this would increase that to 26 feet. And it's generally assumed that when you make a long jump, the height doesn't matter. But if the height does matter, the DM is supposed to provide a DC 10 strength athletics check to clear an obstacle, up to a quarter of the jump's distance. Now, think about this. If we've got a 16 strength and we have this ability, that's 26 feet of distance. That means that we can easily clear 5-foot hurdles, no problem. So we have a creature that's behind a 5-foot obstacle. We can leap over that. We can also leap over creatures with that level of height. And the DM at their discretion might require a DC 10 strength athletics check. Well, we probably have a good strength, we probably have proficiency in athletics, and we're making the check with advantage. So there's almost no chance of failure with that low DC. This is very useful because we are also increasing the height of things we can clear as well as the distance. Now imagine how this would work with difficult terrain. So let's say there's a bunch of difficult terrain between you and an enemy. Well, with this kind of jumping distance, we can leap over that difficult terrain. And if we land in difficult terrain, we need to make a DC 10 acrobatics check to land on our feet. Again, we're making that check with advantage, so we're very, very likely to make it. So this is a great way to avoid not only obstacles, but difficult terrain as well. But where we see it even more impressive, almost supernaturally impressive, is when we combine it with a high jump. Because normally with a high jump, you can leap up to 3 plus your strength modifier in feet. So if we have a 16 strength, you could jump over an obstacle 6 feet high. This character can leap over a wall that's 16 feet high. That is an amazing amount of height to be able to jump over. Now, why I think this is really good on a Paladin is because Paladins are melee characters. We talked about that before with Guiding Bolt. Now, Guiding Bolt gives us an option at range, but ideally, we want to get in close if we can. And Peerless Athlete is going to help us do that because obstacles we might face to getting into melee, we can often just jump right over. So the next channel divinity is called Inspiring Smite, and the way it works is if you are in battle and you hit a creature with an attack and use your Divine Smite, which should happen reasonably often because you're a paladin fighting in melee, then you can use your channel divinity and it's a bonus action, and you can create temporary hit points equal to 2d8 plus your level in this class. That is likely going to be around 12 temporary hit points at 3rd level, and then that will go up as you increase in levels. And then you can either give those temporary hit points to yourself or to an ally, or you could potentially do it and split them up amongst multiple creatures. I think you're generally going to be better off giving yourself or maybe another frontliner those temporary hit points when you use them. It's not a huge number of temporary hit points. 12, I mean, it's a reasonable amount at level 3. At level 3, I mean, your regular hit points are probably in the range of the high 20s. So adding 12 is still a significant percentage increase to your hit points. But 12 hit points isn't going to last that long. And the scaling isn't so great that it's going to go up a whole bunch with levels. But it is something I still would like to have because sometimes when your hit points are getting low, you need a way to improve your hit points. Fighters can do a second wind and heal some hit points. You can do an inspiring smite and boost your hit points with temporary hit points. And the 2d8 plus your level in this class is a little bit more than a fighter could do with a second wind. And you have the flexibility that you could provide it to somebody else or yourself. Now, if you want to give it to somebody else, they have to be within 30 feet of you. So compared to Peerless Athlete, I think this isn't quite as good. But it's still something that, it's not bad. It's something that still gives a significant amount of hit points, though it's not an overwhelming amount of hit points. And it does use your channel divinity, which means you can only do it once per short rest. And if you use it, then that means you can't use your Peerless Athlete. But I think it's okay. Just like with Second Wind, which I also think is okay, Inspiring Smite is okay. So what we have here are we have 2 3rd level abilities, and they're both decent abilities. I don't think either of them are fantastic. If we look at the player's handbook, we see things like Oath of Ancients. It actually has a much worse channel divinity at 3rd level than we do. And then if we look at Oath of Devotion, their channel divinity is decent, but it takes an action. And that's tough to do when that action is just boosting your melee ability, but you're giving up that melee attack on the first round. So those kinds of decisions are difficult to make. When we are using a bonus action, these are things we can do in addition to doing the attack action on our turn, and that makes these a little less difficult to fit into your action economy. So these are something that I could see being useful with being a paladin, but not overwhelmingly powerful. So then, as usual, our Paladin continues, gets that lovely ability at 6th level where they're increasing their saving throws and the saving throws of everyone around them. Then at 7th level, most Paladins get an improvement to their aura. This Paladin does as well, though there is a limit here. And this is the Aura of Alacrity. And what it does is it increases your walking speed by 10 feet. So when I talked about getting haste and it being even better, this is what I mean, because we would be doubling this as well. So if we have a normal walking speed of, let's say, 30 feet, and then we increase it by 10 feet to 40 feet, haste would give us an 80-foot movement rate. And also, what happens is we have this aura where any allies that start their turn within 5 feet of us increase their movement by 10 feet on their turn. And this increases in size to 10 feet at 18th level. Now, there's a few things I want to mention about why I think this isn't so bad, because this one gets crapped on a ton. People hate this. And my understanding is Unearthed Arcana had a super powerful aura at this point. This is why I don't read Unearthed Arcana, because what inevitably happens is you see this super powerful subclass, you think, wow, that's amazing, and when it gets published, it gets nerfed, and you're disappointed. I don't like that. I like to look at things fresh. I like things to be new. When I saw the Oath of Glory and read through it, I didn't have that Unearthed Arcana bias, and looking at it, just comparing it to other Paladin published subclasses, I think this oath does just fine. And Aura of Alacrity, I think, is a decent ability. Here's why. As I mentioned, Paladins are a melee class. Getting additional movement when you are a melee class is big. Now, the one thing about being a paladin above 5th level is often you have a good movement already. And that's not because your base movement is good, but because you've gained access to the Find Steed spell. But the thing is, as long as you are mounted on that steed, then it is always going to start its turn within 5 feet of you, so it's going to get the benefit from the 10-foot movement. So even if you are mounted, your maneuverability improves even more. So if we're looking at a horse that normally has a 60-foot movement, 70 feet of movement at level 7 is pretty impressive, I think. And I'm told one of the things that is so bad about this is that the aura is only 5 feet. But what we can do with this, just imagine this for a moment. Let's say that there is an enemy and we want to be able to get to that enemy and attack them, but we also want our allies to be able to get to that enemy and attack them. Well, our horse, with that 70-foot movement, might be able to move up to that enemy, take the disengage action after we've attacked, move back to our allies, so then they get the bonus to their movement at the beginning of their turn. Remember, our allies don't have to end their turn next to us. We have to end our turn next to them. And that's exceptionally easy to do when you have a mount, because a mount has the ability to disengage. You don't provoke attacks of opportunity as long as you're riding that mount, and you can still make all your attacks, use all your actions as normal, move that 70 feet, start your turn wherever you start, end your turn wherever you want, and so we can just choose to end our turn next to the allies that are going to need that boost. So for how it interacts with Find Steed, for how it interacts with a class that relies on melee combat, I think this is a perfectly solid 7th level ability. Now, people who say that this is the worst in the game, I challenge you to look at Relentless Avenger for the Vengeance Paladin that they get at 7th level and tell me that that's not much worse than this. This is better than that, straight out better than that. Now, it's not the strongest aura at 7th level. There I'd be looking at something like Oath of Ancients or maybe Oath of Conquest. But I think this is a perfectly solid 7th level ability. So the next one we get is Glorious Defense. This is at 15th level, so we're pretty high level. And this ability is fine. I don't think it's a fantastic ability, but I think it's okay. It is, first of all, limited in number of uses. We can only use this a number of times equal to our charisma modifier. So with a 15th level paladin, I'd be thinking that would be between 3 and 5 times. Then what it does is we can use our reaction. Now, we're not using our reaction really for anything as a paladin. They don't get reaction abilities normally. So we have our reaction available, so that's fine. We get hit with an attack, or an ally that's within 10 feet of us gets hit with an attack. We can use our reaction to add our charisma modifier to our armor class or their armor class, potentially turning that hit into a miss. Because it's only against one attack, I don't think it's great. This is about as good as we would expect from something like Cutting Words, for example, or the Defensive Duelist feat, for example. This is kind of along the same lines where we're providing one armor class boost to one attack, and it uses up our reaction. So as a defense, I think it's okay at best. The nice thing here, though, is if this bonus makes that attack miss, we get a free weapon attack as part of that reaction. So this could take a paladin that maybe gets 3 attacks around using Polar Master, an extra attack. Maybe we're even getting 4 attacks around because we've got a haste spell up. Well, then we could potentially even get 5 attacks in a round using Glorious Defense. So that, I think, boosts it up a bit to the point where I think this ability is fine. I don't think it's a great ability, but I certainly don't think it's a bad ability. And that brings us to our capstone, which I think is quite good. First off, it is a bonus action, which means that we can activate this without giving up our attacks, and we gain the benefits for 1 minute, which means it will probably last the entire combat. We get 3 things here, and we don't have to choose, we get all 3. The first is we gain advantage on all charisma checks. Big whoop, right? In terms of combat advantage, this is pretty much irrelevant. But I do see how if we're playing in a campaign where maybe we're not in combat every day, using this in terms of social requirements, I could see it being useful. But again, why don't we just casting enhance ability? So I don't think this one is very good. Then I'm going to skip to the last one, which is if you fail a saving throw, you can use your reaction to re-roll it. You must use this new roll. This I think is reasonably good. Will I use a reaction to re-roll a saving throw? Absolutely. If you fail a saving throw, that sucks. You don't want to fail saving throws. So I would gladly use my reaction to get a re-roll on that. But the one that really makes this great, I think, is the middle one. Once on each of your turns, when you make a weapon attack and miss, you can cause that attack to hit instead. So if we're talking about your standard round, where maybe you're making 3 attacks a round, you're probably going to hit with 2 of them. You're probably going to miss with 1 of them. But not the Glory Paladin. The Glory Paladin is going to hit with all 3. And that means an increase to offense of 50% with a capstone. That is a huge increase. We're talking about an extra hit every round unless you were going to hit with every attack anyways. That is a big boost to damage on a paladin. And then once we use this ability, we can't use it again until we complete a long rest or until we expend a 5th level spell slot to use it again. So there's 2 ways this is better than the other paladin capstones, or a lot of them anyways. The first is it uses a bonus action instead of an action. A lot of Paladin subclasses require an action to activate their capstone. And the other is that the other Paladin capstones, once you use them, they're done. But with this one, if we wanted to spend a 5th level spell, and I would, this is a non-concentration effect that has a pretty huge advantage to you. I would totally spend my 5th level spell slot to be able to use this capstone again. In fact, if we're willing to use both our 5th level spell slots, we can use this feature 3 times per long rest, so triple as often as other paladins. So a very strong capstone for Paladin for the Oath of Glory. So when I look at this, I don't see any abilities I think are terrible. I think at worst they're fine, and some of them are quite good. Now, just to be honest and forthright here, I'm not saying I think that the Oath of Glory is the strongest Paladin subclass. In fact, if I was to rank it, I'd probably rank it near the middle. I look at things like Oath of Conquest, and I think it's a better subclass. But if I look at what I would consider second place, that's a lot harder. I mean, Oath of the Crown gets Spirit Guardians, but they get some crappy abilities. And then I look at Oath of Vengeance. They get some good 3rd level abilities and some good spells, but their 7th level ability is awful. I look at Oath of Devotion. They get some good abilities too, but that action to activate their sacred weapon is a problem. So I see issues with those. And here I see a set of abilities that overall I think at worst are fine. This might be in the running for your second best subclass, but I think there are a lot of subclasses in that running. But I definitely would play this 100%. And that's why this is going to be the next build I do, will be an Oath of Glory Paladin, which I will be presenting next week. So I hope you'll join me for that next week. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you next week, and we'll make an Oath of Glory Paladin.